Want to thank everybody for joining us tonight for our water and amphibians are awesome. Rachel Richter is joining us tonight. She has a bachelor's degree in wildlife and fisheries science from Texas A&M and a master's degree in wildlife ecology from Texas State. As an urban wildlife biologist, she focuses on making our communities more wildlife friendly through educational outreach and providing technical guidance. So Rachel, thank you for being with us this evening and for your patience. And you can share your screen and begin at any time.
Thank you. Okay. Thank you everyone for tuning in tonight and for bearing with us through the technical difficulties. I'm glad you're all here. So as you know, we're here to talk about water and wildlife tonight. And so the first part of this presentation is going to be kind of geared towards water and what makes a healthy water body and why all that's important. And then I'm going to talk about all of the critters that rely on water in North Texas. Not all of them, but some of them. So just kind of jumping right in here, I'm gonna talk some kind of big picture stuff. How much water do we have available on planet Earth? You probably know that the vast majority of the water on Earth is in the ocean, so it's salt water. And only about 3% of the water on Earth is fresh water. And of that fresh water, again, the majority of it, 69%, is trapped in ice caps and glaciers, so it's not really available to us. So it's only a small amount of water that is accessible and usable to us as like drinking water and for food and cleaning and like the stuff that we generally use water for. Another way to look at this is if Earth were a basketball, all of the water on Earth would be the size of a ping pong ball, and all of the available surface water, fresh surface water, would be a popcorn kernel. So that's kind of the scale that we're dealing with here, which is why it's so important that we be good stewards of the water that we do have. Here in Texas, our primary sources of fresh water, our primary natural sources of fresh water, are rivers and aquifers. So we have 15 major river basins here in Texas and 9 major aquifers. As far as lakes go, there is one naturally occurring lake in the state of Texas, and we have to share that one with Louisiana. That's Caddo Lake, and it's right on the eastern border of the state there. So all other lakes in Texas are man-made. They are reservoirs created for human use and water sources and things like that. Texas is very much a state of rivers. So what we're lacking in lake, we make up for in rivers. We have 191,000 miles of streams and rivers and 3,700 named streams. And of course, here in North Texas, our big major river is the Trinity. And we also have many smaller creeks and things like that going through the DFW area as well. And of course, it's super important for a lot of reasons that our water bodies be healthy and have good water quality associated with them, because that benefits us. We're going to focus on wildlife tonight, but it can't go without mentioning how much healthy water bodies benefits us as well. It's first and foremost, it's critical to our health that we have clean drinking water. No one wants to drink gross, dirty water that might make us sick. There can be some serious health complications associated with that. Healthy water bodies and healthy habitats surrounding those water bodies are also really important for preventing large-scale floods and more destructive floods. Water is also something that is a recreation opportunity for a lot of us, whether it's swimming or fishing or boating or going out in a kayak or even just taking a walk around the lake, something like that. These are all things that are really You know, they're fun to do, but they're also important to our mental and physical health as well. And also water, it has a tremendous economic value. We cannot replace the ecosystem services that come along with having clean water. And if we tried to, it'd be extremely expensive. So water has an you know, significant economic value, and having a low quality water body also can have a significant cost associated with it. Also, having healthy water bodies that people want to hang out with can also generate money from people wanting to live near that water body, or people even traveling to visit it. So recreation tourism can also be an important economic factor as well. So I want to talk about a couple of kind of specific types of water bodies. So the first is a riparian area, and this may be a term that you're not familiar with, but all it means is the vegetation, the kind of vegetative buffer that surrounds a stream. So any creek, river, stream, whatever you want to call it, should have a natural vegetative buffer, a strip of vegetation on both sides that is basically part of the floodplain. So this is the area that is designed to be kind of influenced by the presence of that creek. So because of the presence of the water, you're going to have distinctive soils, which is going to lead to distinctive vegetation. And this is basically a transitional zone between the wet environment in the river and the more dry upland zone. And so here's kind of another way to look at this. So this is just kind of a diagram of a floodplain. And so rivers don't always stay within their banks. Sometimes they have overbank flows or floods. And the way that it works in a healthy riparian system is you have kind of stages of vegetation as you get farther away from the river. And these vegetation communities, these plant communities, are designed so that they are able to handle that flow. They're used to that disturbance, that periodic flooding disturbance. And when the water comes out of the banks, it benefits the plants that are in that area, because it provides water, and it also deposits new soil and nutrients and minerals and things that helps to foster the plant community in return. Now, also, this is something that's really important to keep intact in terms of flood prevention, because these areas are really good at slowing water down and holding it in place. So another just kind of type of water body that I want to talk about real quick is a wetland. And wetlands vary pretty greatly in what they look like, but in general, a wetland is an area that is permanently or seasonally flooded by water, where the water table is relatively close to the surface. And again, this is a transitional area between a wet environment and a dry environment. Now, some wetlands may hold water year-round. Others may only hold water for a brief period of time after it rains. So this is what I mean by they can look very different. And a lot of times those wetlands that do dry out, that kind of seasonal periodic drying period is something that helps to increase plant diversity, because that wet versus dry period allows different plants to germinate and grow at different times. Wetlands are really important. They're big biodiversity hubs, especially down at the coast. They're basically nurseries for lots of baby fish and other small organisms that are in relative safety compared to the larger ocean. So, but even inland, there's still biodiversity hubs as well. So one of the ways that you can tell, just kind of by looking at a water body, whether or not it's healthy, whether or not it's functioning as it should, is just by looking to see if there's vegetation. Because vegetation is critically important to maintaining the health of a water body. So one of the key features of vegetation and a healthy water body is our native plants tend to have really long, really deep, really complex root systems. And those long, deep roots reach really far down into the soil, and they're really good at holding that soil in place. And holding that soil in place means that that bank is less likely to be eroded. So you're not going to have sediment coming off and getting into the water and messing with water quality and getting deposited downstream, and all of the other problems that come with erosion. Now, those big long roots also help to slow down the water speed because they help to retain water in the soil, and also let that water filter down into our aquifers. So we get groundwater recharge also out of healthily, properly vegetated water body banks. And so having vegetation in the water body also adds more structure and diversity, which is important for wildlife. So vegetation in the water can help create different types of habitat within the water for fish and other aquatic organisms. And then the habitat outside is also really important for terrestrial animals. Plants also improve water quality just from their presence. They filter out pollutants and contaminants from the water and improve the water quality. So there's lots of good things. It's really important, if you want to have a healthy water body, the best thing to do is to maintain that native vegetation that should be around it. So what can happen if you don't have a healthy water body? So one issue can be erosion, which can lead to some really serious financial problems in addition to other problems. So this is an example. It's a little bit hard maybe to see from this picture, but this is a creek that has a severe erosion problem. And this creek has started kind of undercutting. And so the creek used to be higher up, and because of the erosion, it slowly worked its way down lower and lower. And it also has, it's been undercut. And so, and the reason why is on this side you have a road, and on this side you've got like, I think a parking lot, but it's cut off from that riparian buffer. It doesn't have that vegetative buffer that it needs to have access to the floodplain. So there's nothing really to slow the water down as it's moving through. And what happened in this case, you can kind of see in this picture. So this guardrail is where the road starts. These barriers are where the city has had to redirect traffic to because the stream, the erosion is so bad that it's undercutting the road and it's no longer safe to drive right here. And so when something like this happens, this is now going to cost this community millions of dollars to fix. And this is something that can be prevented by keeping those good native plants in place and maintaining a buffer and keeping healthy water quality, keeping a healthy stream. So also when we remove the floodplain, if we remove that access to the floodplain, we tend to get more destructive flooding that spaces out. So having our native vegetation in place can prevent serious flooding. And if we have a water body that has been listed as impaired due to some sort of contaminant, so something like E. coli, that can actually reduce your recreation opportunities because you may not be able to fish or swim if there's too much bacteria in the water. It could be a health impact. And then again, of course, no one wants to drink water that's not clean. So riparian areas are very sensitive, and not just riparian areas, but any aquatic to terrestrial zone. So any water body that the vegetation around it tends to be pretty sensitive, which means that if it's disturbed, it's probably going to go away. It doesn't like disturbance, not very resilient to disturbance. But the good news is with proper management, you can often regain a lot of what you lose. And so this is just a photo series that's a kind of, that I'm going to go through quickly. That's just one example of what that can look like. So this is a spot in the Nueces River. And as you can see, there's not much left in terms of a plant community. We're having problems with erosion, and the stream channel is pretty like sprawled out. There's not much of a stream channel really. And so the reason for this, the reason why it looks like this is because in this particular area, there was heavy use of off-road vehicles just driving up and down the stream break, and that killed all of the vegetation. And so in this situation, the landowner decided to stop allowing off-road vehicles to drive up and down here, and to let the stream recover and see what happened, to let the river recover and see what happened. So here's the next year. After just 1 year, you're already starting to see an improvement with vegetation coming in. And typically, the first species that show up are what we call colonizer species. So these are species that do pretty well under disturbance, and they're usually really good at holding soil in place. In 2009, you see continued improvements, and we're starting to see that that soil is being held in place. Like, look, see, they're starting to kind of build up a little bit of a stream bank here. Those plants are starting to prevent the erosion from happening. 2010, you see continued improvement, where it's starting to, you know, we got more vegetation than we do rocks at this point. 2011, what happened to all the water? So you may remember 2011 was an extreme drought year, and so the Nueces River actually in this segment, it went dry. So the river was no longer holding water. But what's really interesting about this picture, look at the plants. They still look pretty green and healthy and happy. And that's an example of how well the plants can hold water in the soil. So sometimes you'll hear riparian areas referred to as a sponge, and this is a good example of that. The plants did such a good job of keeping water in the soil that even though the river has run dry, they're still able to get the water that they need because they've trapped it there in the soil. And then 2012, this is the final slide, but you can see that the recovery here is really pretty evident. And this place looks strikingly different than it did 5 years ago. And so not only is this improving the water quality and reducing the erosion, but this also is going to create important habitat for wildlife. And so the vegetation around water bodies tends to be unique because, as we already talked about, it's got that influence of the water, which is going to change the soils, and that's going to in turn determine the plants that grow there. And then the plants that grow there help to determine what animals can be found there, because they provide important food sources, and that unique vegetation brings it in. It's also a source of water. Nothing can live without water. So everything needs to come and get water at some point. Now, there are some species that can go quite a long time without water, but in general, most species need water fairly regularly. That vegetation and that different type of habitat is also going to provide shelter and nesting spots, safe places to raise young. It can be an important migratory stop for birds that are in their migration. And all of these things, this kind of diversity of habitat and access to water, tends to mean that around water bodies you have a greater density and a greater diversity of plants and animals. So we're going to switch gears a little bit now and talk about the different critters that can be found in and around water bodies. So we're going to start at the bottom of the food chain here, but really one of the most important parts of the ecosystem is our macroinvertebrates, our small, tiny invertebrates that are found within water bodies. And these guys are super important because they are the bottom of the food chain. That means they are the basis of the food chain. And so without them, the whole thing will kind of collapse. So these guys are super important. Excuse me. And this little chart on the right here is kind of interesting because it shows it's divided into 3 groups here. And the three groups are based on how sensitive to pollution they are. So the things, the macroinvertebrates in group 1 are the most sensitive to pollution, so they're the least tolerant. And then down here are those that are the most tolerant of pollution. So if you have a water body that doesn't have very many of these, like if it doesn't have a lot of, you're not seeing a lot of larvae or some snails or crayfish in there, then that's probably a pretty good indication that that water body has a decent level of pollution, because these species are not able to persist. And again, these guys are so important because so many things eat them, and they're really kind of lay the foundation for the ecosystem. In addition to that, these guys, in addition to being the basis of the ecosystem, some of these guys are really important because they help us control things that we do not want to have around, like mosquitoes. So if you do not like mosquitoes, dragonflies are your friend. They eat mosquitoes at every stage of their life cycle. So they're really important. And dragonfly larvae are, got a picture of one right here. They would be like terrifying if they were any bigger than they are, really. Like if this thing was like the size of a dog, we would be all running in fear from them, because they really kind of have some similar features to like aliens and horror movies, sci-fi movies and stuff like that. So dragonfly larvae, this structure right here, this is sort of like a highly modified lip, is one way to look at it. And this particular species, it looks like it has some pinchers on the end to grab stuff, and they shoot their like lip out sort of like a projectile, and they use it to catch stuff. And so they'll do that all day while they're swimming around in the water eating mosquito larvae. There's some really cool videos online showing that thing in action if you want to look that up later. So next up, we're going to talk about amphibians. And amphibians are really cool critters. So if you're not familiar, these are frogs, toads, and salamanders. And there's another category of amphibian called caecilians. They look like earthworms, sort of, kind of like worms. They're limbless, but they have a spine. They are vertebrates. They're true amphibians, but they're not found in the US, so we don't talk about them very often, but I just mentioned them so you know that they exist. But here in DFW, we do have about 20 species of amphibians. Most of them are frogs and toads. We have one salamander species, which is the smallmouth salamander. So we do have them here. They're just not super abundant in our area. Now, the cool thing, one of the really cool things about amphibians, one thing that they're really known for is that they've got semi-permeable skin. And what that means is their skin is not a completely closed barrier to the environment the way ours is. And a lot of amphibians actually partially breathe through their skin. So there's gas exchange between the amphibian's skin and the outer environment. And there's actually some species of salamander, not the smallmouth salamander, but there are some species of salamander that as adults, they don't have lungs. They have no lungs even though they live on land, which is pretty amazing if you think about it. They breathe entirely through their skin. So this non-concrete barrier of the amphibian's skin means that they tend to be a little bit more sensitive to the environment than other species. So you'll often hear amphibians referred to as an indicator species, and that idea behind that is that because they have the semi-permeable, really sensitive skin, that they are going to be less tolerant of pollutants and other changes in the aquatic environment than some other species. So basically what that means is if you don't have, like if you notice a sudden and sharp decline in the amphibians in an area, that might be an indicator that something has gone awry with the water quality in the area. Another reason why amphibians can be a good indicator species is they eat primarily bugs. And as we kind of talked about on the last slide, those bugs, those aquatic invertebrates, can be good indicators as well as to what the level of the water quality is. So amphibians are super important. They're not just cool, but they're also a really good kind of indicator of what the health of the environment looks like. On here, I have just pictures of just a few of the different species that are found in our area. This guy right here is the southern leopard frog. There's a couple of other leopard frog species that look really similar to this one that are also found in our area. So this is just one of them. This little guy here is the Blanchard's cricket frog. And if you've ever been walking on the edge of a pond and you see tiny little frogs hopping everywhere, it's probably these guys. They're super abundant. And they've got a really distinctive call too. It kind of sounds like someone clicking marbles together is the best way I can describe it. I'm not going to try and imitate it for you because I am not that skilled. But they're very cute little guys that are pretty common around here. So you've probably encountered one of these before. Another frog species that we have is the green tree frog. We also have a gray tree frog species. And these again are really cute little guys, pretty charismatic. They've got those sticky toe pads that allow them to climb up vertical surfaces. And then this guy is the Gulf Coast toad. And so if you've ever seen a toad in your neighborhood or like in your backyard, it's probably this one, because this one is definitely the most common toad species that we have. It's a member of the Bufonidae family, or the true toad family, which the kind of defining characteristic of that family is they have these glands called parotoid glands on their head, sort of the back of their head behind their eye here. So these little things that I'm waving my mouse over. And these actually secrete poison. And so this toad is poisonous. I mean, not enough that it's gonna like kill you, but you know, if your dog gets a hold of one and bites it, they're probably gonna throw up later, but it's not gonna kill your dog. Anyway, but definitely don't let your dog chew on one. I wouldn't recommend that. But they're really kind of harmless. Like I said, they are everywhere. But it's just kind of cool. If you kind of squeeze it, I don't recommend this, but if you squeeze it, you can start to see like the stuff coming out. So another important fact about amphibians, and something that kind of distinguishes them from a lot of other vertebrates, is that they need water to reproduce. All amphibians require water to reproduce. And one reason for that is they go through metamorphosis, and also their eggs do not have a hard outer shell the way that a chicken egg does. So their eggs are kind of gelatinous. They have like a soft outer membrane instead of a hard shell, and so they have to be laid in water or in at least a very moist environment. And they all go through metamorphosis. So here's just kind of the classical example of, you know, a frog. First it will turn into a tadpole, and then slowly it will grow limbs and lose its tail. So this is kind of a unique feature of amphibians, that they go through this cool change, this metamorphosis. So next up, we've got reptiles, which are often, people confuse these with reptiles and amphibians quite a bit. And I think that's because a lot of times we study them together, and they also have similar life history traits and live in kind of similar habitats, but they, from an evolutionary standpoint, they haven't had a common ancestor in like 300 or 400 million years. So they're not closely related at all genetically. but we tend to lump them together, but they're quite different animals. So the reptiles include turtles, lizards, snakes, and alligators. One key difference is they have eggs with shells, and their eggs are laid on land. So even something like a sea turtle that spends all of its life in the water, it comes up on land to lay its eggs. So reptile eggs cannot be laid in the water. They also have scales, and some of them have nails and teeth, which is not typical of amphibians. And in DFW, we have about 80 species of reptiles. So they include, I'm going to talk about some of the groups of reptiles here. And the one that probably jumps to your mind when you think about water and you think about reptiles is likely going to be turtles. So I have just a few turtle species here. This one here in the corner, this is the red-eared slider. This is by far the most common turtle species that we have in our area. It is pretty distinctive most of the time because it has this red patch behind its eye. Some of these turtles, though, when they get older, they develop more melanin in their skin. And basically what that means is their skin gets darker, and so they will start to lose this, the yellow and red patterning on their face. So they may kind of look totally black, or they may kind of have like a speckled appearance. So if you ever see a turtle that sort of looks like a red-eared slider, but its head is black, it probably is a red-eared slider. We have river cooters as well, which sort of look like red-eared sliders, but they've got some different patterns and things like that. And then we have the spiny soft-shell turtle, which is a really cool looking turtle. If you've never seen one, they're really neat. They kind of have like almost like a Loch Ness monster look because they've got this like long kind of skinny neck and skinny pointy snout. And they get their name because their shell is not as hard as the typical turtle shell. It's much more kind of soft and flexible. And so these turtles, the red-eared slider, the river cooter, and the spiny softshell, those are probably the most common turtles that are typically going to be like out basking. So these are the ones that you're most likely to see, but we do have several other species of turtles. And we also have other species of basking turtles, but don't have time to talk about them all. So this cheery little guy is a razorback musk turtle, which is not as common. And they also typically spend a lot of time more at the bottom, so you don't see them as often. And we also have two species of snapping turtle. This is the common snapping turtle, which, as you would expect, this is the more abundant one here in DFW. But we also have the alligator snapping turtle, which is found in some pretty developed areas of DFW, which is really cool because the alligator snapping turtle is a vulnerable species, and it's one of those species that has been in discussion for a long time as to whether or not it should be federally listed under the Endangered Species Act as threatened or endangered. It's not currently listed federally, but it is a uncommon species, so it's kind of cool that we have it here in DFW. And you can kind of see the difference between the two. People confuse these guys a lot. But you can see the alligator snapping turtle has that much more kind of spiky shell. And what else? Oh, and these guys are also cool. This is the one that has their tongue looks like a worm, and they use that as a lure for fish. Turtles, of course, their most defining feature is their shell. So the shell, the top part is called the carapace, the bottom part is called the plastron, and the shell provides protection, and it also helps them to conserve water. Now the downside is it does limit their mobility a little bit, and it also restricts how they can reproduce, how many eggs they can have. So typically with turtles, the females are bigger because the bigger they are, the more eggs they can hold. And let's see, with turtles, they have a strategy of basically we're going to have a lot of babies and very few of them are going to survive. So mortality among eggs and hatchlings is very, very high. But once they reach adulthood, then turtles are generally pretty hard to kill, and they can live for a long time. Turtles also have something known as temperature dependent sex determination, which basically means that the gender of the turtle is determined by the temperature of the soil while it's incubating. So in turtles, if the temperatures are warmer, it's going to be female, and if it's cooler, then it's going to be male. Up next, we have snakes. Snakes are pretty common in water bodies, and they are not all cottonmouths. When people see a snake in the water, they almost always kind of assume that it has to be a cottonmouth, but we have lots of other snake species, and some of them look kind of similar to cottonmouths. So down here is the cottonmouth. One of the best ways to identify it is this stripe that it has behind its eye. It also has a distinctive pattern, but the problem about the pattern is they can sometimes, again, get more melanistic, get more dark pigment as they get older, so it may not always be super prominent. That and their body shape is pretty distinctive as well. This is probably the one that most commonly gets accused of being a cottonmouth. This is the plain-bellied water snake, totally harmless. And you can see here it's got these little stripes around its lip, these little vertical bars around its lip. This is a diamondback water snake. This is a juvenile one, so they do get bigger. But this is another really common water snake that you'll see in our area. Another harmless one. And then two more harmless guys that look pretty cute. This is a western wyvern snake. This is a juvenile one, but they don't get terribly big. And then this is a rough green snake. And then not going to spend too much time on alligators, but I do just want to mention alligators because I feel like people often don't realize that they're part of our native fauna here in DFW, and people tend to get really surprised when they see one because they're not very common, but they are out there. And so it's usually sometimes when people see one, they get kind of caught by surprise, and sometimes there's news stories that are like, person saw alligator. So people kind of forget that they're here. But alligators are here. They're really neat animals. They also have temperature dependent sex determination, but it's opposite. So with alligators, cooler temperatures are females and warmer temperatures are males. Birds. When I mention birds and water, the first thing that probably comes to your mind is ducks. So I've got some waterfowl here to start off with, but lots of other birds depend on water, including songbird species, which I didn't include a songbird species on here for the sake of time, but lots of songbird species really kind of rely on riparian areas as well for nesting habitat and other things. So here's a ring-necked duck. This is the American coot. I have this one on here because it's pretty distinctive and they're fairly common. So the black, if you see a black duck with a white bill, that's an American coot. This guy is the northern shoveler, and you can kind of see from this picture why. They've got that really wide, broad bill, and that bill is what they use. It's how they eat. So they use that bill to kind of filter out in the water, and they eat tiny invertebrates and also seeds and other things. And then this guy here is the wood duck, a very pretty duck. It's also a cavity nester, so sometimes people will put out nest boxes to help this duck. They're kind of cool to watch the babies, because their first act leaving the nest, they've got to take this like leap of faith dropping down from the box or the cavity in the tree to make their way to the water. Here are some other birds that are heavily associated with water. This guy is super distinctive, the great blue heron, very large, very pretty bird. The belted kingfisher is another pretty distinctive little guy. He's got a nice little mohawk there and this nice big sharp pointy beak for spearing fish. Pelicans, a lot of people are surprised that we do have pelicans here in North Texas, but they're kind of a cool bird that we get to see from time to time. Killdeer are really common little bird that you see running around near the edges of water, especially with short grass, and sometimes even you'll see them in like parking lots. but they kind of, you know, they're one of these wading birds that runs back and forth. And they are pretty, have pretty low maintenance nests. They pretty much just lay their eggs like right on the ground, which can make, you know, sometimes they can catch you by surprise, not expecting to see a killdeer nest there. But if you get close to their nest, they'll start doing like a broken wing display where they act like they're injured further away to try and draw your attention over there to them. But their babies are super cute. They're little like fuzzballs. And then this is a roseate spoonbill, which is pretty rare here in North Texas, but we do get them. They're much more common further south on the coast. But again, they've got that really broad bill like the northern shoveler has. And then that pretty pink coloration that they get to their feathers is from their diet. So they eat a lot of the macroinvertebrates and crustaceans and stuff that they eat. Have carotenoid pigments in there, and that's what turns their feathers that pretty pink color. And then we even have raptors that really prefer to be near water. And so the red-shouldered hawk is a pretty common one, but it really likes to make its nest in trees that are close to water. Osprey is another large raptor that eats primarily fish, so they like to be near water. And then bald eagles. We have bald eagles that are nesting at some of our large lakes in the DFW area, which is pretty cool. That's a really great conservation success story. Mammals, there are lots of mammals that benefit from the presence of water, and I'm gonna go through these guys kind of quick. But you know, there's obviously the species that probably jump to your mind right away would be the beaver and the river otter, both of which we have here in DFW. Beavers are oftentimes perceived as a nuisance because they can cause damage, but there are things that you can do to try and mitigate that damage so that they don't necessarily have to be removed. And then river otters, people are always excited about river otters, and a lot of people don't know that we do have them here in North Texas. So they're not super common, so you definitely count yourself lucky if you get to see one, but they are out there, but they're just, they're fairly elusive, so they like to kind of avoid people. Raccoons are also really common around water bodies. You know, anytime you look at the mud next to a pond or something like that, you probably see their distinctive little handprint track that they have. And they really like to wash their food before they eat it. So that's part of why they're always near water bodies, but also there's just lots of good food in the water for them to eat. Bats, this is a Townsend's big ear bat in the picture, which we do not have in DFW, but it's a good picture of a bat drinking. And we have lots of other great bat species here in DFW. So bats are one that you may not think of when you think of water, but they need that water. They have to come to the water to drink. And then also at night, there's typically a lot of bugs around water. So a good place to see bats is usually above like a pond, especially if there's trees nearby. At night, because there will be you know, the bats will often roost in the trees and then come and get some water and some bugs around that pond. And even larger mammals like coyotes and foxes can rely on creeks. And so as an example of that, another common mammal here in DFW is bobcats. And a few years ago, my predecessor in this position did a research project with some graduate students looking at the bobcat population here in DFW. And they wanted to know, where are they going? What type of habitat are they using? How many of them are there? So they did, they put GPS tracking collars on them, on 10 individuals, and they reported a bunch of locations and looked at that information and analyzed it. And what they found is basically we have higher population densities and smaller home ranges here in DFW, which is pretty typical of urban carnivores. And it's thought that that is because we have less available habitat, but a high food availability. So they're able to exist in kind of higher densities than they would be in a more rural area. Now, one of the other cool things that they found, and you can kind of see it looking at this picture, is that creeks are really super important travel corridors for these animals. So that riparian zone is a really critical transportation highway for a lot of animals, not just bobcats, but a lot of critters, because it's one of the few places in the city where they have like a linear path that they can follow to get from point A to point B. And also a lot of times in our cities, you know, if you go to Google Earth and kind of play around, you'll notice a lot of the green spaces is associated with some sort of water body. And part of the reason for that is it's really hard to develop in the water. So a lot of times what gets left behind are the streams and lakes and wetlands and stuff like that. And that creates that kind of creates a network of patches of green space that can be connected. And it's super important for wildlife to move around the city using those creeks and green spaces, which is another reason why that vegetative buffer around our riparian areas and around our other water bodies is so super important. And I just want to quickly put in a plug for iNaturalist. If you're not familiar with it, it is a citizen science website where you can upload pictures of any living thing, any plant, animal, bug, whatever, and you can put it up. You can share it with the iNaturalist platform, and other people will come along and identify it for you. There's also an app on that you can download on your phone. So if you ever see a cool bug and you want to know what it is, you can put it up there. Or if you want to document the really cool bird that came to your feeder, that's a great way to do it. And we use this all the time. So it's a great way to contribute to real kind of science efforts. The City Nature Challenge is a once-a-year BioBlitz that is hosted by iNaturalist, and it is an international competition. And not to brag, but the Dallas-Fort Worth area usually does very, very well against the rest of the world. So we'd love to have your help. Last year, we had over 101,000 observations of 6,400 different species, and 4,700 people observing, submitting observations, and 1,800 identifiers. So what's really great about this is it shows not only that we have tremendous diversity of plants and animals inside our cities, but we also have an active constituency of people who want to experience those animals. And if you're wondering, here's what Grapevine looks like on iNaturalist. There's over 21,000 observations of over 2,200 species. So y'all have a lot of great diversity right here in just Grapevine, which is awesome. So I encourage y'all to take a look at this and, you know, submit some observations of your own. And with that, I am happy to take any questions if there's time.
Thank you, Rachel. Yes, participants, please post your questions in the Q&A. Rachel will take a few minutes to answer those. I am pleased, and I know that our executive director, Kathy Nelson, is pleased as well to see that Grapevine has had a good showing of this in the City Nature Challenge and iNat. We promote that app, and we love the ease of use, and we will definitely participate in the City Nature Challenge this year. So I was glad that you brought that up. Again, participants, if you guys have any questions for Rachel, feel free to, you can chat those or type them in the Q&A. I was wondering, Rachel, what are common pollutants that you guys find in rivers or streams in our area that are harmful to our wildlife?
Yeah. So E. coli is a really common one. And then there's also things like phosphates, nitrates, so things like that kind of accumulate and run off into the water bodies. So, you know, that's one thing to be conscious of. You know, keep in mind when you're fertilizing your yard and stuff like that to use an appropriate amount so you're not using too much, because those extra nutrients can run into the water body and accumulate and cause problems like eutrophication and stuff like that. And also increased sediments can cause a problem with the water quality as well.
How does E. coli enter the water stream?
Ooh, so one of the main ways, so anything can contribute E. coli. Like all mammals have E. coli in their gut, and so do birds, you know. So there is some level of contribution from wildlife, but one of the biggest contributors is actually dogs. I forget what the exact number is, but dogs are apparently just like really super fantastic at producing E. coli in their systems. So that's why you see so many campaigns about, like, I know Do the Right Thing is one and stuff like that. So it's super important to pick up after your dogs because they are little E. coli super spreaders.
Good to know. Interesting. Okay, so Carrie had a question. She was wondering how common are deer in our area, in the Grapevine area?
Ooh, okay, so in Grapevine, y'all do have some deer. I'm not sure how common they are specifically in Grapevine, but they're definitely more common in Grapevine than some other areas in DFW. So for example, like, I live in Mansfield and my office is at Cedar Hill State Park. So in that like Joel Pool Lake area, there are no deer. I've never seen one. I've never seen any evidence of one. So deer in DFW tend to be in kind of little pockets. So there's a decent population of them around Lake Grapevine and also Lake Worth, and kind of some of the other large lakes, but they're not distributed throughout the DFW area the way that they are in some other communities like in Central Texas.
Yeah, if you're familiar with Grapevine Snaky Lane, there's a green space there, participants, and we have several deer that live in that green space near Snaky Lane, so that's nice. Okay, Rachel is wondering, are you familiar with the health of Grapevine Lake? Is it free of pollutants, or do you know what the water quality is of our lake, Rachel?
I don't. So I primarily deal with wildlife and kind of just do I get involved with like watershed protection plans and stuff like that as part of my job, but it's not the main thing that I focus on. So I am not sure what the water quality is in Lake Grapevine, but you could probably check with, are y'all Tarrant Regional?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Tarrant Regional Water Department probably has, or Tarrant Regional Water District probably has some good information on that. And there may even be a watershed protection plan or something like that in place that gives guidance.
Good. Jacqueline is wondering what the impact of the zebra mollusk infestation is on Grapevine waterways. Have you found that to be an issue?
Well, they're an issue. I'm not sure how abundant they are at Lake Grapevine yet.
Have you found them, like, where are they the most prevalent in DFW?
In DFW, I'm not sure. I don't work with zebra mussels, but they're a big problem. But I don't know if any of y'all saw, there was recently a news story that I didn't have anything to do with, but some of my colleagues, I guess, did. Some of my colleagues with Texas Parks and Wildlife and our Inland Fisheries Division, I'm going to guess, they were actually able to eradicate zebra mussels from Lake Waco, which is a really impressive feat. So I'd recommend you all kind of looking into that if you are curious about the zebra mussel issues. My understanding is it's not a realistic possibility for everywhere, and I think that part of it is Lake Waco is, I guess, relatively small, so they were able to implement that practice that may not be practical for other places. But yeah, zebra mussels, they can be a big problem. They can crowd out our native mussel species, and also cause some pretty serious economic problems as well.
And are they primarily live in lakes, or do you find them in streams and rivers as well?
I think they can be in both, but I think they're primarily in lakes.
Okay.
I think. Sorry.
Participants, let's see, Dick Guckle, he is a Grapevine resident, and he says that about a year ago, his neighbor sent him a picture of 5 deer between Dove Road and Lucas. And then they also have seen 2 deer behind their home between Dove Road and Lucas as well. So yes, if you are out in the first light of the morning or early in the day, a lot of times in our park areas, particularly around Meadowmere or like I said, Snaky Lane, you will definitely see deer. Let's see.
Yeah, so I would just say with deer, when we get them starting to come regularly into neighborhoods, they can pretty quickly become a problem. So I would just recommend that y'all keep an eye on that so that their population doesn't get out of hand. So make sure that you don't have people in your neighborhood that are feeding them, for example, because putting out those feeders causes big problems. And it's not good for the deer to have them kind of concentrating in neighborhoods. And I don't know that this is currently the situation in Grapevine. I don't think that it is, but just something to keep an eye out. Keep an eye on that deer population because you don't want them to get too big because it's not good for the deer. It's not good for the habitat. And it also is kind of a public safety issue when you think about vehicle collisions as well. So, yeah.
So, Catherine, ask what the main object that pollutes water. So primarily we kind of answered that question. It's primarily E. coli that you find in water as the primary pollutant.
I don't know if that's the primary one. Again, you know, I'm not probably the best person to speak on that because I'm not a
water quality specialist.
Yeah, I'm not a water quality specialist, but I know that that's just one, you know, the meetings that I have been in that have dealt specifically with water qualities, they do talk about E. coli quite a bit, but there's several other contaminants as well.
Okay. Attendees, do you guys have any more questions for Rachel? I know that that we appreciate her expertise. Let's see, Jacqueline had a real quick question. She said she sees road runners frequently around Grapevine Lake. Are you familiar, Rachel? Have you seen road runners in other areas of DFW?
Yeah, they're around. They're really cool birds. My husband was telling me a story the other day of a coworker of his. They saw a roadrunner, and she was like, "Wait, those are a real thing?" And he's like, "Yeah."
They're pretty interesting to see. So yeah, we have some. We definitely have some near the lake as well.
So cool tidbit about roadrunners really fast. They, as part of their courtship ritual, the male will catch a lizard and present it to the female. So if you ever see a roadrunner running around with a lizard in its beak, that's what it's doing.
He's going on a date.
Yeah, it's the equivalent of flowers in his beak.
Oh. Well, I really appreciate your time, Rachel. It was very informative, and I know that our participants enjoyed it as well. I want to encourage everybody to please, when we finish the webinar, you're going to receive an email that will give you a link to attend our February lecture. So we encourage you to do that. We're going to be talking about the importance of pollinators. And so you may or may not know that Grapevine is a B City USA city. So we're going to have some really great information about pollinators for February. Also, there's a survey in your survey link as well in that email. If you would take, I think there might be 5 questions in that survey. If you take a few minutes to take that survey, that'll let us know what other topics you're interested in. We're planning the rest of 2021 for our lectures, and so we would really welcome your feedback. Again, Rachel, thank you for your time, and participants, thank you so much for being here with us, and I hope everybody has a good rest of their evening. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you, Rachel.